Hello, everyone. We're assuming everyone, or at least some people, are joining us today.
All the everyone's.
All the everyone for Breakdown with Tim and Ann. And I am your co-host, Timothy Patrick McCarthy. And
I am your co-host, Ann Stott. And we're very excited to be here with you today.
What's going on today, Ann? Anything going on today?
Nah, just your regular Monday.
Regular Monday, because none of this is normal.
None of this is normal. I don't know why. I don't like Mondays.
No, I don't like Mondays generally, but woo, Lord. So the first thing, in all seriousness, that we need to mark, of course, is the federal holiday today, the official holiday of Martin Luther King Day, honoring, of course, the great slain civil rights and Black freedom activist Martin Luther King, but also, which we'll be sharing some words on the ticker tape below, but also it's a national holiday that is meant to celebrate Dr. King and his legacy, of course, but also the broader struggle for Black freedom and civil rights in the United States, which, of course, has been a bedrock inspiration throughout history for all freedom, equality, and civil rights and human rights struggles. So that's what we want to center at the beginning of today, because that's very important, particularly as it relates to other things that may be going on today, which we'll get to in a second. But we also just heard, as we came on live, that the great Cecile Richards, the longtime and legendary feminist activist and head of Planned Parenthood for many, many years, a huge figure in the struggle for reproductive justice, has passed away, has succumbed to an aggressive form of brain cancer at the age of 67. And we just heard that as we were getting ready to come on.
We did just hear that, and we want to honor her and her life of service, really. You know, just an incredible life of service for women and all people everywhere.
Yeah.
So we are in deep gratitude of Cecile Richards and sending condolences to all her loved ones and honor her legacy as well today.
Yeah. And also to mention, Cecile Richards, of course, was the daughter of the legendary, the late, great Ann Richards, who was a brilliant, trailblazing politician, first woman to be governor of Texas, was very sharp-tongued and brilliant of mind, and had my favorite quote from a convention speech in modern American political history, which was that she said that George H.W. Bush, she gave the keynote address at the 88 convention, I think, Democratic convention, and she said that George H.W. Bush was born with a silver foot in his mouth. Which I remember, I think I was 17 when I watched that, and I fell off the couch. I'm like, oh my God, that's hilarious. But
that probably is the best quote from a Democratic National Convention in our lifetime. She was one of a kind, man.
Oh my God. I think of all those women from Texas, right? You know, Sheila Jackson Lee, who just passed away, the late, great Sheila Jackson Lee, and Barbara Jordan, Molly Ivins, Ann Richards, right? Texas is full of some amazing women throughout history who have been trailblazers and inspiration. So let's mark them today too.
Let's mark them totally, and also seem like the definition of the word firebrand, right?
Absolutely. Totally. And then, of course, just this weekend, finally, perhaps, we hope, long overdue ceasefire in Gaza.
The first active ceasefire in 13 months, or 13 months, and some exchange of hostages on both sides yesterday. And finally, a reprieve for the people of Gaza who have been living in a genocide and unbearable, untenable inhumane conditions for a year and 4 months. And so relieved that the bombing has stopped there. As I just said to you before we started, I'm concerned and concerned about the conditions under which this all happened. We don't know what kind of backroom wheeling and dealing Trump did. I'm assuming he told Netanyahu he'll have whatever he wants and that Trump will back him to stay in power, even if the war is really over. Like, who knows? West Bank? Sure.
Right. Right.
Settlements in Gaza, cool. Like we don't know, but at
we're
least
going to see Trump Tower Gaza go up. I mean, it's just grotesque. I mean, the destruction and the displacement, the disappearing, right, of Palestinian people throughout the last 14 months. Obviously, the agony of not knowing whether or when the hostages would be released, right? I mean, there's so much pain in this, and I mean, as you and I both are on record, we've been calling for a ceasefire and an end to this war from the very minute it started. But one of my very dear friends, Professor Syed Atshan from Swarthmore College, who's a preeminent anthropologist, runs their peace and conflict studies program at Swarthmore, and is a Palestinian activist, also queer, gay, someone I've known for a very long time. He posted a very moving post, and he's someone who's a peace person in the most profound way, and a humanist unrivaled humanist in my opinion. And he posted something the other day that if indeed the ceasefire happens, this was before it was official, and lasts, or it has hope of lasting, it really only gets us back to the kind of reset of October 6th, of course, notwithstanding all of the death and the mounting death toll that has come since. But the occupation is still there, right? All of the injustice and oppression that characterizes Israel and Palestine, and the treatment of Palestinian people, and this anyway, all of that is still very much on the table, and is still very much a profound area of concern, and one that I think we should be especially concerned about with this new presidential administration coming in, which of course leads to something else that's happening today, which is the inauguration of the 47th president of the United States, who also happens to be the 45th president of the United States. And so here he is again. And, we were both trying to figure out, like, what are we going to do today, in addition to marking Martin Luther King Day and other things? But, like, what are we going to do? Are we going to watch this thing? Are we going to whatever?
Right. And we were tossing it out to all our friends, like, are people watching? Are they not watching? Are they this? Are they that? And people were like, we're not watching. And then we were like, wait, we're starting a show.
Right.
We should just do a show. Speaking of doing a show, a little interruption for tech, because we don't have our tech assistant yet. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. And if you subscribe, after 5 minutes, you'll be able to come into the chat and chat. And if we're really on it, we'll be able to interact with you. But Tim, for some reason, this isn't showing up on your page. So if you on your phone could go to my page and share.
I would do that.
Because it is showing up on my page. And then if you share it to your page, people will be able to see it.
Okay. I am doing that right now. I'm doing it right now.
But I realized when we planned what we were going to talk about today, we didn't talk about the most important part, which is the first part of breakdown. Right. So I'll let you share, and then we got to have a breakdown, because while you share,
I just shared.
Oh, you just shared. It's done.
I'm so tech savvy now with my collaboration with you. It's like it's a seamless operation from this old queer. So I'm learning. I'm a lifelong learner when it comes.
Is there any 21-year-old who wants to be our tech person?
I'm sure. I have amazing students, some of whom I think are watching, and they're the ones who helped me along in this digital age.
So, part of the point of this show is that we have a breakdown. Like, we acknowledge that there is a huge emotional toll. I'm going to start crying to what is happening right now, in our country for so many people. And that, to create a space where, yes, we talk about the issues, and Tim and I care a lot about the issues and can wonk out about the issues, but we're also all right now, like, deeply burdened with some of us seem to be more resilient than others, but I'm deeply burdened with what is happening. So I want us to make space for each other to acknowledge that. And hopefully that makes space for the people watching to also have that experience and maybe feel less alone in it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm giving you a virtual hug, of course.
I know. You too.
We're near each other, so maybe we can find each other after this afternoon. Yeah, burdened is one word. There's so many words to describe how I'm feeling right now, how so many of us are feeling, how you're feeling. And I could hear that when I posted the other day and asked for people like, what are you doing on Monday? Like, are you gonna watch? Are you gonna boycott? Are you gonna have a blackout? Are you gonna have a solidarity brunch with Michelle Obama? Are you gonna bear witness to this thing that's happening? And people had lots of different responses. Some were very substantive, some were a little snarky, but totally understandable. Some were filled with anger, rage, despair, despondency, all of these things, resistance, rebellion. I could hear it all in those responses. And the reason I say that is because depending on the day, right, I go back and forth. There are days when I don't want to get out of bed. There are days when I want to leave the country. There are days when I just want to cry and cuddle with my dog and my husband. And there are other days where I'm like, no, I'm focused. I want to figure out how to be part of the resistance. I want to figure out how to build things with people and hug on folks and love on folks and create things and collaborate like we're doing now. This is actually, for me, very helpful and a wonderful addition. And it started with our breakdown on the produce aisle, which we talked about in the first episode. Like, you went home after we chatted in Stop and Shop in the produce aisle, and then like wrote me in the middle of the night and said, we need to have a show and it's called Breakdown, and are you in? And I was like, sure, of course I'm in. And I didn't even think about what that would entail, tech-wise or otherwise. But then there's another part of it where it's like, you were like, over the weekend, you're like, let's go live on Monday. We're doing our second episode. Like, let's do it. So I was like, sure, let's do it. And I realized, Anne, that part of my coping mechanism in this time right now is like following you anywhere, like into traffic. Like I would have done the polar bear plunge with you in the bay. Like, whatever you want me to do, I'm all in. And so here we are. And for me, in all seriousness, like that's part of how I cope. I have to be in community with people. Whether it's in virtual space or in real time, preferably, right? Because it's why I love teaching. It's why I love movement building. It's why I love art, right? It's why I love even reading, because you're in community with the writer, right? When you're in history, you're in community with the elders and the ancestors. So like for me, community is where it's at. And so anything we can do to create community as a form of resistance, and then all as a place to care for each other and build with each other and create with each other, I'm all in on all of that. And I anybody who wants to be in community, let's do it.
Let's do it. And I agree with that right now. I mean, I see a lot of people saying like, join a book club, like, right. Go play, a sport with somebody, like have a potluck, like just kind of like shore up your support systems, which I think is so important because, I think the reason I had this idea with you in particular, as I said last time, is that, you have all this intelligence and knowledge and insight about our country and the history of our country and where we are now, and in particular resistance movements in our country, which we're going to get into, but you also have this beautiful emotional availability, which isn't always true when you get really wonky. Like a lot of the wonky people don't always have the like heart piece, and you really have the heart piece, which I so appreciate. And I mean, I don't know about you, like in the month or so after the election, I was so sad. Like I had all this like anticipatory grief about the suffering that's going to come and the extra work we're going to have to do, just to like try to stay at neutral, if we can even stay at neutral, which we're not going to on some issues. Yeah. But I got to tell you, this week, I am so mad.
Oh,
like,
I know.
I am so mad. Like I am enraged. And And it's funny because I'm not really like, I don't like Trump. He reviles me. He's so noxious. But I'm actually more mad at like the capitulators and the enablers and the Mitch McConnells. Like I have my wrath for them, like knows no bounds.
Oh, I'm so with you. That has been the thing. I mean, we talked about the cruelty and the chaos, right? Trump's playbook is cruelty and chaos, and it's an authoritarian fascist playbook, and we know this, and it leads to the divide and conquering and people like fighting each other and doing the work for them. We know that this is coming because it's been there all along. This is what they do. But and sometimes that will induce exhaustion. We talked about exhaustion last time, and we both feel that, I know. But there is a rage that comes from this as well. And it's not a rage. I want to be really clear about this as someone who's been attacked my entire life for being like someone who hates America and like I'm unpatriotic and all this bullshit. I actually love this country and I love the people in this country and in the world. And that's why I'm so angry. I'm not angry because I hate my country. I hate what is happening to my country. And that's different. I hate what we and who we are becoming. And maybe we're becoming again, maybe it's swinging back. There's all sorts of metaphors for ebb and flow and pendulums and cycles and circles of American history. And without getting too deep into that, like my rage comes from what is happening to this country and what is happening to the people I love and care about in this country by this chaos and cruelty machine. So I want to be clear about that. And maybe I'm being a little preemptive because I know someone is probably going to call me un-American on the live stream, probably, but it is what it is. But one of the things that we know, right, from our own history, like Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, and James Baldwin and Audre Lorde and all of these people, the women from Texas that we talked about before, they constitute a different historical tradition. And that's one of the historical traditions of this country I love, of being a firebrand, of being fierce, being critical, being lovingly critical, right? Being unafraid to speak when you're being told to be silent or expected to be silent. And Tim Snyder, the historian at Yale, who I love, who of course has this book on tyranny. I don't know if you can see it, but it's on tyranny. It's a bestseller. He talks about 20 lessons that he has gleaned from the study of authoritarianism and fascism and the backlash against and the decline of democracies in Europe. And so he spent his whole career studying authoritarianism, fascism, and democratic backsliding. So these are 20 points that he has, lessons he's learned that are tailored to our time. And he published this after Trump was elected the first time, and it's every bit, even more so relevant to this moment. And the very first lesson that he says is, do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want and then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do. And he calls this anticipatory obedience. And I see this happening everywhere, not just within government, elected officials, folks who are working in government. Certainly it's happening there. It's happening in the tech industry. It's happening in big banks in corporate America. It's happening in academia. It's happening in the artistic world, right? How many of these artists are performing at his inaugural, right? When someone said, in a world of Carrie Underwoods, be a Taylor Swift, right? Like, it's happening everywhere. So this anticipatory obedience is something that we're seeing in every sector, every institution. I would like to say it's only with the Mitch McConnells and only with the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs, but it's happening all across the board. And I don't want to be part of that. I know you don't either.
And yeah, and I think that leads to something interesting. And speaking of people I would follow into the street, someone I know and follow, a lifelong activist, BC Craig, an educator and historian, by the way, was posting today about like how much more demoralizing this moment feels than 2016. And part of it is that, you know, like in 2017 on Inauguration Day, like the social media platforms were having a real conversation about their role in the election. And, you know, the papers, to my mind, inadequately, but like were scrambling to sort of catch up with what they hadn't done before, which is expose the corruption that was going to be coming and expose the lies and all of that. And it just seems like all of that has fallen away. And it brings up this really valid question that people are having about social media right now, in particular. You know, I got off Twitter, and a lot of people I know have gotten off Twitter already, but, you know, with Mark Zuckerberg, with his collaboration and collusion, also giving $1 million to the inauguration campaign so he can be inside, probably at the party, right? Like, what are we doing about Facebook and Instagram and this bind we're in now, where these are major points of communication and connection, and a lot of political organizing happens on these sites, and a lot of information sharing happens on these sites. I mean, let's be clear, like, if it weren't for social media, this last 14, 15 months of bombing Gaza would have been like business as usual for Israel.
That's right.
I mean, the only reason, not the only, there's been a movement happening for years and a lot of groundwork laid for people to have a lot more awareness about Palestine in general, but like a huge amount of information sharing happened through social media.
That's right.
It wouldn't have happened otherwise, and forced the national media to shift their story over time.
Right.
You know, not a lot, but a little.
And it wasn't just information, it was coverage, right? I mean that's the thing, is that we are not always at our best, but we are now producers and circulators of news, right? That we can actually be the first to break something sometimes if we have a phone and we're in a place that the mainstream media hasn't decided is important enough or hasn't gotten to yet. And so it does pose a dilemma. I mean, even with us today, right? We are on Facebook, we are live on Facebook, but we're live on Facebook through StreamYard, through YouTube, right? Because so many people are blackout on Facebook and doing that meta blackout for the week. And I'm probably going to participate in it too after we're done here. But like, what does that do when we, you know, I'm thinking back to the Tim Snyder piece, like there are important ways to boycott and to express our dissatisfaction with something that can move the dial, right? And undo the injustice. But there's also a world in which if we retreat too much or withdraw too much, right, then we're, again, does that qualify for obeying in advance? Like, what's disobedience and what's obedience? I think we're having a very, very important, we need to have a very important conversation about that right now. And I don't know what to do. I got off Twitter years ago because it's a sewer. I think it's a sewer. I always have. And I'm deeply concerned about the surveillance of all of this, and the data mining, and obviously the spread not just of misinformation but of disinformation. The AI freaks me the fuck out. Like, I mean, a lot of this is very scary to me, and I don't want to participate in any more than I need to. And yet, at the same time, right, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of these platforms, YouTube, have been very, very important to the transformation and democratization of political culture, not just in the United States, but globally. Right? So many of the revolutions, right? The Iranian Revolution, the hashtag Black Lives Matter at the Women's March, right? What you're talking about, the coverage and information sharing in Gaza. Like, there are so many.
Arab Spring, even.
Arab Spring, right? Exactly. I mean, this played a role. So I think we have to wrestle with like how we use, right, these platforms as much as like whether we use these platforms. Because I think one of my colleagues, one of my friends from college, who's now a professor at NYU, talks about social media platforms as sort of liberation technologies and oppression technologies, and that they're, in some ways they can be value neutral. It's how they're used and by whom that determines whether or not it is participating in the systems of oppression, of fascism, authoritarianism, or whether they're participating in the more democratizing impulses in the face of peace or love or liberation.
Yeah, I think those are both really great distinctions, you know, liberation versus oppression, and also not whether, but how.
Yeah.
And as long as we, I mean, you know, we are feeding a machine for sure.
Sure.
You know, I don't click on ads in social media, but it's so lame because I do get ads for, you know, the algorithm is right sometimes. And so then I go to the web and I just search for the thing. And I'm like, they know that they showed me the ad. And then they know.
Yeah. I bought like an egg cooker last week, like a hard-boiled egg thing with like water, whatever. My friend had a dinner party and made deviled eggs. I'm like, I need one of those. And so I was like, what am I doing? And I Googled it, and then I came on Facebook and there were 4 ads for egg-related things. I'm like, and then of course I'm like, oh, but the price of eggs is so high. Trump will bring that down. I'm totally joking. But I'm like, how does this happen? Like, and of course I don't know how it happens because I'm a humanities, I'm a historian. I don't know anything about the algorithmic technology and so forth. But yeah, it is scary. And but I also heard in a lot of what I was witnessing on, especially on Facebook. I'm on Facebook more than I am on any of these other platforms. I said I got off Twitter. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, but I don't really do much there for a variety of reasons. So I'm not super entrenched in it or involved in it. It certainly doesn't like guide my life, and I don't think I'm fully addicted to social media in the ways that a lot of people are, or screens. But I also think that there's a world where there are ways to build community and to have community. I mean, I know people myself, I've used it when I've been in times of struggle, when I've had something I wanted to get off my chest. Birthdays are like the best thing about Facebook, right? And, I know friends right now who are going through real struggles in their lives, divorces and abusive relationships and, illness and, caring for, we're at this age, like caring for parents. And like, there is a lot of like really beautiful sharing that's going on with people who are struggling with something, or who are lonely, or who are, really, really uncertain about something that's happening in their life that may change it for the worse. And I think like those moments where we can be connected, because we're not always going to be there in person for those folks, right? Even the people we care most about in the world. And to be able to have that kind of solidarity, raising children, there are all sorts of ways in which people are able to use these things, to say nothing of organizing and protest, that are really generative and really powerful. So anyway, I could go on about that, but
and have become just a default way that we connect with each other. And I mean, I guess this is true in many technologies and industries. Like the phone companies were owned by private corporations.
Mhm.
For a long time, they are in our lives in really inappropriate ways, but for a long time they weren't, facilitating the kind of negative things that Facebook and Instagram are. I will say Blue Sky is like the nice Twitter.
Yeah.
And I am over there, and it does seem to be the only platform run by someone with a community ethic right now.
Yeah, I get that. I remember when Twitter was the best place to get breaking news if you followed journalists, right? There was a time where people loved Twitter too. And I don't know. I got into not an argument, but a really dear friend of mine who's lovely, who's like an evangelist for Blue Sky. And he's like out there telling everybody to get on Blue Sky. And I'm just like, do I need this in my life? Like, I mean, maybe I do. And I'm happy to be proven wrong. He says the same thing. It's like much more collective and caring and intentional. And if that's true, then I'm all in, right? Based on, back to what I said about community. But I just like, the new it thing rush for me is something that I guess I've gotten to a certain point in my life where I'm like, I need to see how this plays out before I'm going to dive in, because I've been diving in and out for too long. I wanted to ask you though, because you're a musician, you're a singer and songwriter, you're an actress, you're someone who is so creative, so brilliantly creative and accomplished in your own right. And like social media platforms are so important for the distribution of music and and obviously there are complications with that in terms of ownership and artistic freedom and so forth. But like getting the word out about your art social media is essential, not just a good to have, but a absolutely have to have. What do you think about this when it comes to like art and the curation, creation, circulation of art?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting about social media at this point, because like I said, the truth is now, if you want to reach people with a post, you have to pay for it on Facebook and Instagram. Like everybody knows only 25 people of their friends see, I have like 3,500 friends on Facebook. Unless I start really posting all the time, only 25 people see each post. And so when I released an album in 2015 and I put out my first music video and I had this YouTube link and I like threw it on Facebook, and within a day or two, like the video had 2,500 views. And I was like, oh my God, and that can't happen today. Like, unless you already have a huge following, or you're just really good at social media in general. Like if you have that like innate skill.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is the equivalent of a virtual billboard. Like you can't, I think it's very hard to be an artist still trying to find a significant audience
Yeah.
without using those platforms. But everyone will tell you within those worlds, the email list is gold.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Because look at what happened with Twitter. Like there are people who got huge Twitter followings, and then one day Twitter, and you didn't stay on. I came to Twitter later than you did, and I actually really liked Twitter. Like if you curated who you followed, like I followed all these film critics. I would get like their first feels from like Venice and Berlin, and it was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But you really saw it like when Musk took over, like the functionality fell apart, it was just a mess. So
Right.
we don't really have control over the connections we have on Instagram and Facebook unless we pay for them.
Yeah.
And so I'm not leaving, like I'm not going to leave, but like you said about the how, it's definitely going to change the how of how I interact here.
Yeah, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel the same. I feel the same way. And it did change when Musk took over, and it absolutely, you can see the changes with Zuckerberg right now. One of the things that I find absolutely, what part of the rage, going back to the rage and how we experience it and channel it, like maybe it's because Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan went to Harvard, and like I have a kind of like adjacent relationship with them. He's always been incredibly strange and problematic. She much less so, right? She came out of Phillips Brooks' house and did a lot of public service and work when she was an undergrad. And so like there was a hope, I will think, maybe this is too inside baseball, but I was always hopeful that she would like improve him, which is
Right.
like not her burden, but like, they signed up for it. But I was, and so it makes me crazy that the millions of dollars that are being poured into the Trump, just the inaugural fund, right? And the transition money that's flowing in there from people like, Priscilla Chan can't be a Republican. Like unless she has really changed since she was an undergraduate and recent graduate. And I'm not even sure he is, right? And Tim Gill, who's definitely not a Republican, they're all giving money. Musk, obviously we know where he is, but they're all giving money to Trump. And I saw an interesting thing the other day that none of them have given money to the wildfires fund. Like none of them. Right, Taylor Swift speaking of Taylor Swift in comparison to Carrie Underwood, who's singing something today, $10 million to she could probably give $10 billion, but like she gave $10 million to this. There was like a graph which showed all the different tech, CEOs and what they've given, right, in the millions and millions and millions, probably tens of millions at this point to Trump, right, and then but they're not giving any money to anything, either whether it's like responding to a crisis, the wildfires in LA, or to anything else, right? Humanitarian aid to Gaza or Planned Parenthood or, your local homeless shelter, right? Like, what are they giving? They're giving to the people that they're going to get from, right? And that's what we're seeing. In addition to the ascendant fascism and authoritarianism of the new Trump regime, right? You have a class of oligarchs increasingly linked to big tech and AI and these kinds of things, right? That are taking over. That's what we're seeing today, right? We're seeing a kind of seizure or a takeover of our public life by private oligarchs, who many of whom are obeying in advance, right? So
they are obeying in advance, and really, this is. I don't know where it goes from here, but this is the culmination of Republican work, at least since Reagan. And certainly always their desire, right? Like even before that, but they were just, so not in control in the 60s and 70s. But they have been working toward this moment for a long time to have business be in charge.
Right. Well, interestingly, there's a Reagan connection to Martin Luther King Day as well. So Reagan, of course, Reagan signed the law making Martin Luther King Day federal holiday into law in 1983. There was huge opposition at the time. Jesse Helms, the senator from North Carolina, who's a wretched human being for all of his life, he led the charge to the filibuster and to sink the Martin Luther King Day bill. And Reagan signed it into law, but then was like very outspoken about how it was going to cost too much, right? The federal holiday is very expensive for the people, you know? And it was actually labor unions and
because it's not about racism.
It's not about racism. It's really about
never about racism. It's
of course they're never about racism.
Never.
Ever. And so, like, right after King was assassinated in April of 1968, there had been a movement led by civil rights folks and union folks to get this as a federal holiday. So finally it gets signed into law in 1983, and then, but it doesn't get put into law. It wasn't celebrated for the first time until 1986. So there was opposition all the way through. Reagan reluctantly signs this after Congress passes it, and then it's delayed for 3 years in terms of its implementation because people at the state level weren't willing to say Martin Luther King Day. They wanted to say Martin Luther King Day and Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson or Civil Rights Day, right? They wanted, and it's unbelievable. There are still, I think, 3 or 4 states in the country that celebrate Martin Luther King, Robert E. Lee Day today. Right. And oh, yes, they're still on the books. And it's New Hampshire didn't add Martin Luther King, lest we think this is only a Southern problem or a Southern white problem. New Hampshire did not add Martin Luther King Day to it. It was a civil rights day, right? Until 1999. Better late than never, but no rush, people. No rush, New Hampshire, right? And of course, New Hampshire is the whitest state in the union. So there is a relationship between these things. It's not about the wages of money. It's about the wages of whiteness, of course, which of course Black freedom activists like Martin Luther King and so many others understand and are very clear about, right? It takes white people a lot longer and still some people on a steep learning curve to get to that place. So there's this interesting Reagan, this has been an agenda for all that. Just when looking at the history of Martin Luther King Day as a federal holiday, right, it goes back to that point, right? And certainly the overturning of abortion rights, that's been a 50-year campaign and a 50-year movement, frankly, right? So we're seeing, as you said, rightly, there's a culmination of so many things, but there's also, I fear, and maybe we could now get into the inauguration and what's coming. This is a commencement as well as a culmination today, that we call inauguration. So I think that's I think that for me the source of terror is that this is the culmination of all of these decades of anti-work, and then it's the commencement of a new kind of treachery that is terrifying.
It is really terrifying, and I guess I wanted to talk. I mean, I said before that I feel really angry, and I do feel really angry. I'm just so angry, but I'm also afraid, right? I'm afraid. I'm angry. I'm afraid. I'm sad. And I'm wondering, like, how afraid do you feel? Like, for yourself, for your people, like, and how are you?
Yeah. I do. I am afraid. I'm afraid. I'm afraid first and foremost for folks who have already felt the disproportionate impact of the cruelty and the chaos, right? People who are migrants, undocumented folks, women, Black people, people of color more broadly, trans folks specifically within our community, but LGBTQ folks more broadly, right? All of these different groups, the disabled, right, the disabilities community, so many people who are vulnerable because of who they are. And that's a long tradition in America too, right? Which is one of the reasons why the Black freedom struggle is at the core of that other tradition of America, right? This idea of right from jump resisting the slave trade and the institution of slavery and enslavement, the aftermath of the fall of Reconstruction, segregation. I mean, every step of the way in American history, going back to 1619, which is a decade and a half or more, a century and a half before the country was even founded. So the Black freedom tradition like predates the United States by 150 years. And so, so we should pay attention, deep attention, close attention to the lessons from that history. But when you think about like the vulnerability that comes with being a different kind of person, right? An other, as I sometimes refer to us, that's what I am afraid of most of all. And I'm, within the LGBTQ community. And of course, we're out here at the end of America, which is the title of our segment today. And I joke about Provincetown being this crazy place at the end of America, literally at the tip of the Cape, right? Like it's one end of America. But it also is at a time when it feels like a version of this country has died or is dying, and that something else is coming that's far, far, far worse. And so when I think about the fear that I have related to that, it's like, who is going to be, there are going to be people deported this week. There are going to be people who he's going to set ICE agents out for folks. He's signed 10 or is going to promising to sign at least 10 executive orders or actions today related to the border, right? One of those executive actions, from what we're hearing from the coverage, at least initially, because he hasn't signed them yet, he's probably still going on and on about American carnage right now. The carnage,
and how great he is.
Yeah, how great he is, how amazing he is, and how shitty the country is. And
amazing.
Of course, how shitty the country is has nothing to do with his greatness, because he's
no, he's going to make it all better.
Right. But I mean, he's promising to sign at least 100 executive actions or orders today at some point after the ceremony's over. And, they include all sorts of things. And if you go down at least what the reporting is telling us that they're going to do, 10 different border crisis bills, right? He's going to reverse all of the actions of the Biden-Harris administration in favor of gender affirming care, in favor of protection for non-binary and trans people. They made enormous advances, more than any other presidential administration in modern history, on issues of gender identity and expression, on protections for non-binary and trans people. Like, all of that's going away. The targeting of migrants, the conflation of undocumented people as illegal aliens with people who are in gangs and criminals. There's a criminalization happening around everybody who's a migrant, right, or perceived to be, right, much less specifically undocumented folks. There's a world in which some of these executive orders are going to actually exponentially increase the number of people who are now classified as undocumented if they try to get rid of and are successful in the courts of getting rid of birthright citizenship. They're getting rid of asylum. They're putting a 4-month moratorium on refugee resettlement. So so many of these things, right, are going after specific people. There's a new task force evidently coming where the federal government is going to cooperate fully with local law enforcement if any illegal alien or migrant, or who knows how expansive the category is, kills a police officer, right? So much of this it's performative and it's symbolic, and who knows whether or not, especially birthright citizenship, will be upheld in the courts. I doubt it will be, because it's the bedrock element of the 14th Amendment from 1868. That's not easy to get rid of. But the 14th Amendment and equal protection of people who are citizens of the United States, which came in the wake of the abolition of slavery and the enfranchisement of 4 million enslaved African Americans, right? The 14th Amendment represents an expansion of equality and citizenship and a protection of people who are considered citizens. And these executive orders and actions are attacking not only the bedrock provision of birthright citizenship and equal protection in the 14th Amendment, but it's attacking the very people who in the 150 years since the 14th Amendment have come to be protected by the 14th Amendment and claims of equal protection and birthright guarantees, not just claims. So this is dangerous shit. And it's not just policy that might impact people. It's people directed public policy that is rooted in the cruelty and the chaos of everything that he represents, which is nothing great. Sorry, I just went on a rant there, but
I loved it. I loved every word of it. We needed it. I'm pretty sure the people watching are feeling it too. Let it out. We're having a breakdown.
And I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a historian, but I know what the 14th Amendment represents.
Look, we need our historians. We need our perspective right now. We need your perspective right now. And it's true, and it's horrifying. what's happening. I did want to share, you knew this, so you just gave a great overview of the executive orders happening today and how horrifying they are, and they are important and they need to be talked about, and they plant a flag for the agenda that is taking over the federal government as of today. And I want to bring into perspective some words from Chase Strangio, the trans lawyer for the ACLU, who is the first known trans person to argue before the Supreme Court recently. And he said the other day, in advance of inauguration, this is on his Instagram account, which you can follow at Chase Strangio, it's just his name. In advance of inauguration and in preparation for the weeks and months and years ahead, I just wanted to share 3 quick thoughts. First, the administration will issue some executive orders that do not and cannot change the law.
Right.
They will be glorified press releases designed to create confusion and chaos and cruelty. And I'm going to keep reading this, but part of what happens that so many people, you know, there are the people on the right who are really excited for this cruelty, and then there are the people who like thought they were lowering the price of eggs, which, you know, I have so much to say about that, but they don't understand how this works. Like, they don't understand that just by issuing these executive orders for people in vulnerable communities, we understand that validates and opens the door for a lot of like casual cruelty and day-to-day violence against marginalized and vulnerable people. We can't even say marginalized anymore. Like, we've got like Black people, people of color, immigrants, queer people, trans people.
Vast majority of the country. It's like
a vast majority of the country, right? So we have to acknowledge that these executive orders are, again, like a culmination of creating all this space for basically like white, you know, patriarchal supremacy to injure people. And that can happen legally, but it can also be happening in the day-to-day in lots of dangerous ways. But the second thing Chase Strangio said is, the media will exacerbate the chaos with inaccurate headlines designed to stoke fear and gain clicks rather than provide information and context, all while diminishing the power and presence of organized resistance. Third, we have a profound and powerful ability to care for each other. I'm going to start crying, share resources and care, create art, and find the blueprints from those that charted these paths long before we got here.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And with that, we haven't even done like a full Martin Luther King quote yet, but I'm going to do my James Baldwin quote just to like go back to people who, you know, we go to. Oh, wait, which one is it? Where is it? Okay. Let's do that. Okay. So wait, I'm going to make myself big for the quote.
Go for it.
Then, we're having a timeout for tech moment because we really like threw this together in 2 seconds. So bear with us, people. Do you have underneath your screen in StreamYard, do you have a bunch of little squares with like?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. So when you read, we're going to make you big. Okay.
Oh, that's
fancy. Look at that.
Go ahead.
All right. This is James Baldwin from The Fire Next Time. If you need some like powerful, inspirational writing and wisdom for this time, and you haven't read The Fire Next Time, this is essential reading. And I'm sure it's a banned book somewhere in this country.
Yeah. It's definitely on the list. Yeah.
And will continue to be banned in the coming years. So, you know, an act of resistance alone. If you want to resist in your house by yourself, read. It's doing that thing.
Also, you can read The Fire Next Time this afternoon, which I often do on Martin Luther King Day, because it's
you do?
108 pages. You can, and it will change your life if you have not read it. But
it flies by, and it will change your life. And there was a period of time in my life where I literally did not leave home without this book. Like, it was in my bag all the time, and I'd be sitting on the subway, and I just like pull it out and like read parts of it. Okay, so. We should certainly know by now that it is one thing to overthrow a dictator or repel an invader, and quite another thing really to achieve a revolution. Time and time again, the people discover that they have merely betrayed themselves into the hands of yet another pharaoh, who, since he was necessary to put the broken country together, will not let them go. Perhaps people being the conundrums that they are and having so little desire to shoulder the burden of their lives, this is what will always happen. But at the bottom of my heart, I do not believe this. I think that people can be better than that. And I know that people can be better than they are.
I love that. I love that.
And I'm really glad that James Baldwin knows that, because my faith wavers from time to time.
It's interesting because Baldwin also, talked a lot about, there was at least a rhetorical, but I do think substantive faith that James Baldwin had in folks, but it was yoked together with a very legitimate rage and I think a deep kind of pessimism about people's willingness to get better. I think he believed, right, as he said there, believed that we'd get better, but may not have always believed that people wanted to get better or would be willing to get better. You have to be able to be a better person, to become a better person, right? If you're fine with being a tire fire of a human being, which Trump seems really comfortable with, right, then there's no chance for that. But I do appreciate always kind of Baldwin's faith in something, right? In something unseen or unproven, right? He talks about, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. I think that is obviously he was a genius with words, his ability to, bring words together so beautifully and yet directly communicate his ideas was, in some senses unparalleled. Yeah. But I think this genius of being able to, feel his full rage about what he witnessed. And I want to own on Martin Luther King Day that I can't even imagine witnessing what he witnessed and still having the vision he had. But to feel that full rage, still be connected to his love of humanity and love of people and belief in the human spirit, and yet stay clear-eyed about the political reality. Those three things, to hold all of that is profound and unique. And I think why he's such an enduring voice.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I used to tell my students, I taught the Fire Next Time and other Baldwin writings in all my classes, but I taught a course for years called the American Protest Literature from Tom Paine to Tupac. And it started in the late, I think the early 2000s. And the Fire Next Time is one of the texts that we assigned, like the letter from Birmingham jail that I'll quote from later on, and Audre Lorde's essays from Sister Outsider. And I think, Baldwin, when I talk about being a loving critic of institutions, right, I go back to something that Baldwin wrote in the Notes of a Native Son, which was a collection of essays prior to, in the 50s, I think 57, he published them. And one of the things that he says in there, I love America more than any other country on earth, and precisely for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. Right. And so when I talk about being a loving critic or a perpetual critic, I'm rooted in that kind of Baldwin insistence of speaking truth to power and of writing the uncomfortable and inconvenient truths. Also, Baldwin talked a lot about love, and he's one of the most beautiful meditators on love, and that love is tough and heartbreaking at times, but he talked about love is war, love is growing up. And when I think about the sort of the white male grievance that is one of the engines of Trumpism and of the coming fascism, I think about how immature, you said whiny white boys last time we did an episode, the immaturity that is embedded in this sort of everyone's so mean to me, everyone, people don't like me, I'm being canceled, right? There's so much immaturity, Right? And Baldwin also wrote about the nation's sense of itself as being innocent. And America, of course, is never innocent. The founding of the country is dripping in the blood of Black people, indigenous people, and other people. Right? So we can't pretend that we're innocent any more than we can pretend that this is not who we are or what we're becoming. But we do this a lot in this country. But Baldwin, among others, was someone who was so clear-eyed about calling all that bullshit out. Right. And of saying, like, we can't actually become better. We cannot actually achieve a peaceful coexistence. We cannot actually learn to love each other and ourselves if we don't grow up.
Well, and I think, and, again, another piece of his genius, like the way he was able to break down like the psychological immaturity of white people.
Absolutely.
And
the claim of innocence.
Yeah. And this, like, that the problem of racism was fundamentally white people projecting onto Black people everything they couldn't face in themselves.
Right. Instead of looking in the mirror.
Which they can't do. But it brings up this question, like, we didn't even go over talking about this, but this is what happens when we talk. So, one thing I feel really confused about in terms of what are we becoming in the country is, like, on the one hand, people talk about America like in a very offhand way as a center-right country, like, well, we're a center-right country. And on the other hand, the majority of Americans are actually in agreement with most of the Democratic platform. And yet the Democratic Party isn't able to, the truth is, mostly, except for this year, which is one of the things that's so devastating, the Democrats have been winning the popular vote for the last 25 years,
This year, there was an outlier. This year in 2004 were the only years that the Democratic presidential candidates not won the popular vote.
Exactly. So from that standpoint, they have been winning the majority. And some of this is that we're deadlocked by the Electoral College, right? Like, we're just hamstrung, and all the gerrymandering that's been happening. Ben Wickler, who's the head of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, reminded Jon Stewart recently, like, that if it weren't for gerrymandering, we would have a majority in the House right now. Like North Carolina alone, without the gerrymandering of the last 5 years, would give us a majority in the House. So there's all this, like, scheming and corrupt dealing that the Republicans have been doing to hold on to power because they know they're losing it, which is what I think we're really in on some fundamental level is that white men have realized that they're not going to retain control through democratic means, and they're willing to give up whatever democracy that was functioning in this country to maintain control.
That's right. That's exactly.
But how do we, I hate that talk too of like, this isn't who we are. It's like, no, this is all exactly who we are.
Exactly who we've always been, frankly.
Yeah. And how do we work with that moving forward? Like that fundamental conflict that I'm so tired of. I'm so exhausted by it.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, and I don't mean to use like the language of pathology or psychiatry to, I probably say this is crazy or I'm going crazy too much because I don't want to belittle people who struggle, including myself and you and others. But I do think that there is a world where all of this is crazy making, and that we are an incoherent nation. We're incoherent, right? On the one hand, we say we want these things, right? We're constantly talking about freedom and rights, sometimes equality, but less so. But freedom, we're talking about freedom all the time. We wrap everything in freedom. Remember freedom fries after 9/11? Lord Jesus. So everything's about freedom. And people from all different walks of life. Martin Luther King talked about freedom. James Baldwin talked about freedom all the time. We talk about freedom a lot. And so freedom's there, but it's like so many different meanings. But we're a country, I don't want to say we're schizophrenic, but we are an absolutely incoherent country, and so which makes it really hard for us to be clear and to be taken seriously increasingly on a global stage, right? One of the things that we see all the time, you talked about people calling the United States a center-right country. The people who do that most often are people outside of the United States who are looking in and going like, what in God's name is happening? You know, I mean, I have tons of international students. I have friends from all over the globe, right? Many students who are doing amazing work in the world. Actually, pause for a proud papa moment. Ben Wickler was my former student. I'm so proud of the work that he's doing in Wisconsin for the Democratic Party. So I was like, pause for that. And then back to the regular programming. That I have lots of students and former students now who are doing great work globally, right? And so many of them are like, Professor, what's going on? And I'm like, I wish I knew, you know. And you know, but one of the things is that we're not an innocent country, we're an incoherent country. And you think about some of these data points that just came out, right? So like today, so Trump has the lowest. This is according to a New York Times Ipsos poll that was published earlier today. I was looking at. Trump has the lowest approval rating and the highest unfavorable rating of any president coming into office in the last 70 years. 70 years. And yet, according to the coverage of this poll, he has, quote, striking support for his ideas. So how can you not like the dude, but you're like, yeah, but mass deportation's awesome. I'll have a second helping of that. I mean, the fact of the matter is that people know that he's terrible. And yet they vote for him anyway, and they vote for him in higher numbers each of the 3 times. We talked about this in our first episode. He had, I think, 62 something million, and then he was 74, and then he was 77 plus this time. So he's lost some voters, but he's overall net gain in each of the 3, and considerably so between when he ran against Hillary Clinton and then ran against Biden. He lost with 73 point something or 74 million votes, right? And so, you know, so it's an incoherent situation, right? I said one of the things I've been doing when I talk to people who I know are Trump supporters is I always say, I have 2 questions for you. If your son grew up to be like Donald Trump, would you be proud? And if your child grew up and brought Donald Trump home to marry, would you be excited? And nobody can say yes to either of those questions unless they're true MAGA believers, right? So we know, the majority of the country knows that this guy's a tire fire and he's a terrible human being, worst representation of America we could possibly put out into the world. And yet they're striking support for his policies. Right? That 55% of Americans, according to this poll, 55% of Americans strongly or somewhat support mass deportations. 78% oppose any kind of gender-affirming care for minors under the age of 18. And even 46% support tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada, almost half the country. Right? So, I mean, that 55% think mass deportations are great. Almost 80% are opposed to gender affirming care for minors, any gender affirming care for minors, and almost half the country supports tariffs. They don't even know what tariffs are. He doesn't know what tariffs are. Back to what you said before. If you ask Donald Trump, how do you get a bill through Congress? He'd be like, well, we'll do it. We'll do a fabulous bill. It'll be the best bill that ever happened. I'm like, well, how do you get that done? We're going to pass a fabulous bill, and it's going to be my bill, and I'm going to sign it in gold. Like, dude, details. Like, do you understand how this works? And the answer is no. And yet he's in charge of the whole system now. And probably soon enough. I don't know if he's done talking, but we'll figure that out later on. But then, and this gets back to the incoherence, right? When people say how likely, right, is there going to be tariffs on imports? 81%. So 46% support it, but 81% say it's likely. How likely is a mass deportation? 80% say likely, right? But then you get down about making life more affordable for people. How many people think that's likely? 46%. Sorry about your eggs and gas, people. And then how many people think it's likely that he'll reduce the federal budget? 46%. So a minority of people think that he's going to make our lives more affordable or the federal government more efficient and cost friendly, right? So like the likelihood of the bad stuff is like, yeah, he's probably going to do it. And the stuff that he said, I'm going to make your life better for, right? Like if people had a choice between like my egg prices and my gas prices going down, I could afford my rent or my mortgage and like deport all the migrants, right? I hope, maybe I'm totally naive and wrong, and maybe we're really that lost. I think the majority of people would be like eggs, gas, rent, mortgage, please.
Right.
But who knows? But we're all over the place. And the problem is that we are allowing ourselves to be all over the place, which is one of the reasons why when I think about like my rage and my despair and my fear and all of those things that are very real emotionally and psychologically, like I am trying hard to like not rein them in, certainly not pretend they're not there, but do something with them, right? Because I'm afraid of becoming incoherent myself. And I don't want to do that. I certainly don't want to do that in public because that shit's messy.
Yeah.
But here we are. And that to me feels like, you know, so we're all over the place. And again, even that polling data suggests chaos and cruelty.
It really does. And it reminds me of another Baldwin quote. And I was considering reading this about, you know, that thing where he says, you may argue that I'm talking about the political state of the nation in spiritual terms, but all countries are ultimately menaced by their spiritual state. Right. And then he says, we are ruled here by our confusion far more than we know.
That's right.
And right. I feel like, you know, and part of this is, you know, getting to a certain age and having witnessed, you know, basically the same age and the same number of presidential elections, and seeing also like the sort of cult of personality. And it's impossible for us to understand how Trump's personality calls people in. But I mean, you know, that people just sway, you know, and that they can say tariffs, mass deportation, and abortion rights. And you know what I mean? I think this thing that you're saying is actually really helping me. Like if I just accept, like, right, like if part of having some kind of serenity or cohesion is accepting things as they are, I think there's some part of me that wants, you know, like, this is what our country is. And it's like, if I can just say, oh, we're an incoherent country.
But there's two types of acceptance. One, acceptance is acknowledgement, right? We can acknowledge the incoherence, that this shit doesn't make any sense, right? This man with the lowest approval rating and highest unfavorability rating in almost a century of American presidential politics is also like strikingly well supported by a majority of Americans on a whole bunch of stuff that you and I think is crazy, right? Or unconscionable. We can accept that reality without accepting the reality, if you know what I mean, right?
Absolutely.
This is that resistance. Like I can be like, look, we are incoherent. This makes no sense. And I'm not going to spend any time trying to make sense of the nonsense or the incoherence. What I'm going to spend my time on is resisting that nonsense, right? And figuring out how we care for each other and build communities and create and collaborate, all the things that we talked about, that Chase talked about in the Instagram post, right? That to me feels like, you know, rather than, because I think too often those of us, especially I think some people on the left, and I don't want to, you know, be too critical of us right now today, we're in a delicate moment right now, but I do think sometimes that because we're less prone to the disinformation, the conspiracy theories, these things, right? Like, I mean, you and I are both critical thinkers, right? We think for ourselves and we you know, research and write and try to understand people, right? We're not going to just like succumb to the next conspiracy theory. Like that's not where we go, right? But I also think I'll speak for myself, spend too much time in real estate and energy, frankly, trying to like understand the non-understandable, or to make coherent the incoherent, or to, you know, I mean, it's one thing to try to take the cruelty and make it less cruel. That feels like resistance. That feels like community care. That feels like empathy and solidarity, right? But to try to like make sense of the gobbledygook that comes out of Trump's mouth every time he opens it, not my ministry.
No.
Like, it's not my ministry. And like, I'm, you know, one of the things that I struggle with, because I am a historian and I talk and teach about politics and social movements and so forth. So like, I felt vaguely compelled to watch the inauguration today because I've watched every one. I realized today that I've been in person to two of them, and I was celebrating. Well, no, I've been in person to four of them, and two of them I was celebrating Obama's, and then two of them Bush's. I was protesting. And I didn't go, obviously, in 2020 for all the reasons we know, in the middle of a global pandemic. And I didn't go this time, right? And it was like, oh no, it was 2004 and 2016 I protested, right? And then Obama I went to and celebrated. So it was protest, celebrate, protest, and then pandemic, and now today. And I felt like I need to watch this. I need to read that friggin' speech or hear it, because I'm going to have to teach this, and I'm going to have to make sense of it, right? I'm doing a television show tomorrow. I'm going down to Florida to do this big event on Thursday, and all of this is going to come up. So I can't afford to not pay attention to it, but I also don't want to give it ratings. So I'm not watching it now. I'll watch it some other way. And I don't want to give him the whatever it is, the satisfaction or whatever it is, the sick, sadistic sense of self. I don't know what it is, but I'm not giving that to him. But I also think that if we don't pay attention to this on some level, which is why I spent some time this morning on polling and what we know is potentially coming with the executive orders and actions. I spent more time on that, went back to Project 2025, which is terrifying, and a roadmap for all this, and to try to spend my time there.
Right, because by the way, the Project 2025 people are not incoherent, and they are not confused, and they are very clear about what they want to achieve in this coming time. And so the more we can sort of stay clear about that and, like you said, resist that, the better.
Yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree with that.
I love everything you've brought up. I just want to say, a majority of Americans did not vote for him. It was 49%.
Oh, right.
Of the people who voted, and only 63% of the eligible electorate voted for him. Right, so it's really comes
37%. Yeah.
To totally. A third of the population. Now, he got the job done. So, there's that. And we have to, we still have to grapple with this reality. But I feel like I need to, and maybe honestly, I just need to say it for myself.
No, say it. Say it. 37% of Americans didn't vote in this election. Shame on them. And I can have that.
But honestly,
but I get it.
But honestly, that's, in the last 3 elections, so 2016, it was 40% of the electorate didn't vote.
Right.
In 2020, it was 35% of the electorate didn't vote, and now we're right in the middle. In terms of voter turnout, we hit right between 2016 and 2020 in terms of turnout and stuff. So, 30+ % of the electorate doesn't vote in general. And I think obviously there are people who've been digging into that, and I want to read more about that. And
I get frustrated because I know the history of voting rights struggles and why voting rights were denied to people because of racism and white supremacy and misogyny and all the things we're contending with now. And these debates about citizenship and even age. And it's hard for me as a historian who knows, who cares about democracy, but also knows about that long history of voting rights. It's hard for me to wrap my head around someone who decides not to vote, particularly in these times. It's really hard for me to stomach, frankly. And I know I know people, will be upset with me for saying that. And, even people who vote for third parties right now, we talked about that a little. That should be something I do want to talk about that at some point on this show, not today necessarily, but, what does democracy look like moving forward? We're talking a lot about the backsliding of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism and fascism, which we should be talking about. But there's also what do the democratic alternatives look like in this time? And the other thing I just wanted to say, because I was doing a little bit of digging over the weekend into the history of inaugurations, and it's interesting to me that there have been, and that's changed over time, right? That when the inauguration happens, how it's timed to Congress starting its sessions, where it's taking place, and all of that. There have been some interim or some irregular inaugurations, 8 times when presidents have died, 1 time when when Nixon resigned. But one of the things that was really interesting when I found out this way, there are three. Maybe I'll pose it as a quiz. There are three sitting presidents who did not attend the inauguration of their successor after they lost. And do you know who those three are?
I have, this is so funny because sometimes my mother, when she's excited about something, but she thinks it's obvious, she'll be like, you get 3 guesses and the first 2 don't count.
I know, right, exactly. Yeah, I'm not.
So I have 2.
Yeah.
I have 2, Trump and Nixon.
So, right. So Nixon was an irregular, one of those irregular examples. I'm talking about like the shift of power from one president to the next, like going through your successor's inauguration, the person who beat you. So Trump's one.
Trump is one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, so then we're not talking about Lincoln either, because
no, because he was assassinated. I said that with such like he was assassinated. He was assassinated. Very important moment in American history. No, they're related.
They're the Roosevelts?
No, the Adamses. So John Adams hated Thomas Jefferson. They had this very, very acrimonious, terrible campaign against one another. Adams was the sitting president, the second president, and sitting president, and Jefferson challenged him. And Jefferson won, and Adams was just so angry. And actually, that election was seen at the time as like the realization of the deep concern that many of the so-called founders, especially George Washington, had about political party factionalizations. And they were really worried that it would lead to polarization, which of course was prophetic now, given what we're dealing with now. So John Adams left Washington. He didn't even stick around for Jefferson's inauguration. And then later on, John Quincy Adams got out of Dodge when Andrew Jackson was being inaugurated. So both of the Adamses, father and son, were like, no, peace out. And then not till 2021, when Trump was beaten by Biden, did Trump decide to leave too, right? So I just thought that was a little interesting. And I'm sure Donald Trump doesn't know that history. And now the people who are watching this do. So yet another form of
200 years.
200 years, only 3 times has there been the outgoing president didn't attend the successor's inauguration.
I want to say something about numbers too, because I know there are people who are feeling a lot of defeatism about the misogyny in our country. And I too feel a lot of defeatism about the misogyny in our country. And the fact that the 2 people who have lost to Trump are women. But I want to, obviously running for president and winning is an impossible task. Like, it's basically an impossible task. And anyone who signs up for it has signed up for the impossible task, and that's what they signed up for. And Hillary Clinton didn't win, and Kamala Harris didn't win. And that is that reality. And we are living with that reality. So I'm not like making excuses, but I do feel like there's interesting context to both of those runs that needs to be remembered. So Hillary Clinton was trying to do a lot of big things that are very hard to do with a presidential run. Yeah. So not only was she running to be the first woman, which turns out this country, has a problem with. And I was remembering, as I was thinking about this yesterday, just the one thing I was remembering, like, even though people say the mainstream media is lefty, and they are, like, the insidious hatred of her that came through so much, like that leaked tape of Chris Matthews asking for a rape drug before he interviewed her. Like, just that is such a symbol of like what she was up against every day. Or like from that New York Magazine expose in 2016, where someone was following her around and someone on a rope line was like, I love you. I think you're incredible. I've admired you for so long, but I just don't think a woman can be president. And later the interviewer asked Hillary Clinton, like, how do you feel about that? And she said, somebody says that to me every day. Every single day. So that's one. 2, she was trying to hold the White House for the same party 3 terms in a row, which has only happened once since World War II, George H.W. Bush in 1988, and then he lost to Bill Clinton in 92. But that's a huge thing to do because we are an incoherent country and we are ruled here by our confusion far more than we know. And people get wanting this idea of change even when they don't even know what the change is, right?
That's right.
3, she was up against a social media misinformation environment that had never been dealt with before in our country, the scope of which was not even apparent while it was happening, right?
Yeah.
And then 4, she was the first one to go up against Trump, who is the most unconventional presidential candidate we've ever seen. And, a lot of people are like, oh, it should have been a slam dunk. And it's like, no, one, he's this, white patriarchal phenomenon that, and the backlash to having our first Black president. And 2, his greatest skill is fighting. I mean, there was just no script that anybody knew how to write against him.
Yeah.
So, and at the end of the day, she still won the popular vote by 3 million votes. And at the time had the second most votes that any sitting president had ever had, other than Obama in 2008, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yep.
And then Kamala Harris was running to be the first woman president, which we're still saying is very hard to do in this country, obviously.
We're running for that, yeah.
Running to be the first Black woman, Asian American woman,
right?
South Asian woman, running for president, and had 107 days. 107 days when people had barely seen her for years, didn't know what she'd been doing. And the Republicans really talked that up as if anybody ever knows what the vice president is doing.
Right. But all of a sudden, she's very elusive. Right? So they're all elusive. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Nobody remembers. You said Joe Lieberman last week, and I was like, oh my God, Joe Lieberman. Woo!
Yeah.
Well, he didn't actually get to be vice president, but 107 days against someone who has been on the national stage for 20 years.
That's right.
And she still, and I mean, this is goddess level achievement. She still walked away with the third most votes that anyone has ever gotten in a presidential contest in the United States. Now, again, didn't get it done. We still have to face this new reality. It's not like it was at the beginning of the country where she gets to be vice president, there's no consolation prize, but I just think what these two women did achieve is phenomenal. Yeah. And shouldn't be diminished as a sort of defeatist, well, women can't do this, because in fact they did more than a lot of people could have ever done.
Right. Yeah, that's right. The backwards and in heels Ginger Rogers comment, right? Yeah, it's enraging. In addition to all the other things, I remember and I don't know where to always put all that, because on the one hand, I totally agree with everything you've just said, and I mean, what Vice President Harris, or outgoing Vice President Harris, was able to do in an impossible and unprecedented moment. Right, it's impossible enough to run a presidential campaign, get a nomination, win, and then to do it in what are genuinely unprecedented times for a variety of reasons, right, is astonishing. And I have not been one of the people, I won't call myself a pundit or critic or whatever, I'm not that important, but a lot of people have piled on her right away, including Biden, who has said some things that I'd like to attribute to his cognitive decline. But really, dude, you fucking kidding me? Like, and
you who left her with 107
you
days.
who left her with 107 days, and only that, even though everyone knew, including her, frankly, but everyone in your staff knew that you weren't up to this. But anyway, like I want to give her, like, not that it's mine to give, but like I'm not going to pile on, right, with Kamala Harris or with Hillary Clinton, frankly, because they both have done what you have said. But the thing that nags at me about all of that, I mean, one of the things is I remember the morning after the 2016 election, and my parents were living in Florida at the time. My mom's a retired third grade teacher, public school teacher, very active politically and civically, Democrat, lifelong Democrat. And my mother was so excited about the prospect of Hillary Clinton running. And she always thought, like me, maybe this is why I think this, that Hillary was always the best thing about the Clintons. Still is, I think. But my mother, I remember we were on the phone with my dad and my mom. They were on two lines and I was talking to them. We were all just really devastated. And I said, Mom, how are you feeling this morning? And my mother said, I'll never forget it. She said to me, she goes, honey, I don't think I'm going to live to see it. And that was, my mom was 72 when that happened, right? That was 8 years ago. And I just broke down sobbing. I was like, oh, it was like the biggest gut punch. And then the excitement my mother had, now they're moved up here, they live on the Cape near us, the excitement that she felt again, that I could feel her feeling again. And she did postcards and she wore Kamala swag every day for the 107 days. She was like, could not have been more excited, like genuinely, and even more excited, I think, for her than Hillary. And then when she didn't win, we're all crushed. But I called my mom the next morning and I said, how are you feeling? Again, same conversation, like 8 years later. And now she's 80. And I was like, she just turned 80. And I said to her, how are you feeling? And she said, well, honey, I'm not going to live to see it. And it wasn't a sort of, I might not live to see it. It was like, I am not going to live to see this. And that was like crushing in its own way. And now I'm going to start to cry. Because the idea that so many people are perishing in this time where he's ascendant and these brilliant, qualified women who, both of whom should have been president. Although if Hillary had been president, we don't know if Kamala would have been president. But anyway, that's beside the fact. But you get what I'm saying. And the fact that people are perishing, and that my mom and that other people's like elders who have watched their whole life an incoherent country that is coherent on misogyny is heartbreaking.
It's really heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking. And again, it shows us like who we are as a country, you know, exactly who we are. This is not who we are. Like, this is exactly part of who we are. Mm-hmm. And it's very painful.
Yeah.
It's very painful. And it also, I will say, just to get sort of snarky about it, like, I don't want to pile on to Kamala or Hillary too. And they both did hold positions I don't agree with and did plenty of things I don't agree with. And all of those things are symbolic of problems I think exist with the Democratic National Party.
Absolutely.
So those issues I think are party-wide at the national level and need to be rooted out. And so there's no point, they followed a certain playbook that sometimes has worked for the Democratic Party, that the national leadership is addicted to, that I think is not galvanizing the base.
I agree. Totally.
So, okay, they did that. And again, she had 107 days. Like, the idea that she was gonna, come up with some amazing new direction is an unrealistic expectation. But it's devastating. It's devastating. And it is, we're back to the breakdown part. Like, like, I think we do have to make space for the grief of the reality of how much people are willing to sacrifice here, like how far people are, like, even the people who don't. There was this whole thing this summer. There's a company called Sticker Mule, speaking of being an independent artist, and they make custom stickers for people and banners and things like that. And there are a lot of independent musicians who use them. And this summer, after the first assassination attempt, the owner of Sticker Mule sent an email to every customer on their list saying he was a proud Trump supporter. And there are a lot of good people who support Trump, and they're silent because because there's so much stigmatization around supporting Trump, and it's time for good people to know how many good people support Trump. So of course they lost a lot of business. They gained some business. I have no idea how that netted for them. But in the fallout of that, I don't think you get to now. Like in 2016, I think there were a lot of white people who half pay attention to politics. They think all of politics is theater, and they're Republican, and so they voted for the Republican, or they thought he would handle business better because he had a show about business. And maybe they get a little bit of a pass for not seeing the full picture, maybe, but nobody gets a pass anymore.
Nobody gets a pass for the third time. There are people who triple down. It's like being in an all-you-can-eat buffet and you can't stop yourself from eating the food that's probably going to kill you, right? It's you've got to be kidding me. Like anybody who's going in this time, well, maybe it won't be so bad. It's like, how much worse does it need to get for you to not say that? And it's just, you don't get a pass.
And so that people are willing to, even if they truly, truly, truly only care about the price of gas and eggs, and they still somehow believe that Trump can handle the economy better. And there's a lot of media backup for that. There's this underlying assumption, Republicans handle the economy better and the Democrats are nicer to people or whatever, right? And it's so not true when you look at the real evidence, but people are not telling the truth about that in mainstream media. Even if that's true, that you're willing to go along with this chaos and cruelty for that thing, it's devastating that people are willing to do that.
Well, it reminds me, and I think we're coming to a wrap up.
We are.
You and I can talk for days. Yes. There will be another day. We'll have to talk another day. But I go back to if one thing is certain in America, and Stott and Tim McCarthy will live to talk another day. But in a way, this circles back to you were talking about King before, right? One of my rituals on Martin Luther King Day is to reread the letter from Birmingham jail, which I've now read hundreds of times in my life. Also taught that many times in addition to the Fire Next Time. And there's so many things about the letter from Birmingham jail, which as a historical, political, philosophical, moral, religious document is just a master class. And so in there, among the many brilliant insights, he talks about his disappointment with the white moderates. Yeah. And he's writing this letter from Birmingham jail to these white Christian ministers and a white Jewish rabbi, who have accused him and others of being outside agitators, and they're like, you need to be more patient, and you're extremists, and all this stuff. So he's countering all that. So he's writing back to them, and of course, on one level, it's a philosophical, political treatise of nonviolent civil disobedience and direct action. But he has this whole line where he just talks about how that it wasn't the white citizens counselors or the Ku Klux Klanners that were the most disappointing to him. It was the white moderates who stood silently and idly by in the face of injustice, right?
Yeah.
So it's an indictment, of course, of racism, white supremacy, and the most violent of white people in Birmingham and elsewhere. But he's also come on, people who are silent and standing idly by. And I think that one of the things for me that is resonating so much right now is how many people, to Tim Snyder's point, are engaging in this anticipatory obedience, which is the opposite of civil disobedience that King's writing about, and how among the antidotes for this, the most powerful antidote to that, right, is to speak up, is to constantly find your voice and use your voice. And I think that in a way, they're all calling on us, and that long Black freedom tradition that King is a part of, that Baldwin's a part of, that Audre Lorde, who I want to reference in 1 second, is a part of, right? That those abolitionists and enslaved folks and slave rebels who were freed and earned their equal protection of citizenship after that long fight for abolition in the 19th century. There's a long tradition of people who refuse to stand idly by, who refuse to obey in advance, who have always spoken up. And I think about this, in King's famous speech from Riverside Church in 1967, where he says a time to break silence on the Vietnam War, right? And that was a time when he was being accused of being a communist and all of this. And, so much of what that tradition, that Black freedom tradition is demanding of us, is that we speak up and stand up and find each other in these moments. And I think about this essay that I teach in my course on brave leadership and communication. It's one of the first texts the students read, The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action by Audre Lorde. And it's from a speech that she gave at the Modern Language Association panel in 1977, where she leads with these words. She says, "I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood." And then right after she opens with that, she talks about her health, and she died of cancer and had been diagnosed with a growth. It turned out to be benign, but she's really being incredibly vulnerable about her own struggles with health and ultimately of cancer, which is what she died of. And then she ends that speech, which becomes an essay, by saying, "We can learn to work and speak when we are afraid, in the same way we have learned to work and speak when we are tired. For we have been socialized to respect fear more than our own needs for language and definition. And while we wait in silence for that final luxury of fearlessness, the weight of that silence will choke us. The fact that we are here and that I speak these words is an attempt to break that silence and bridge some of those differences between us. For it is not difference which immobilizes us, but silence. And there are so many silences to be broken." And it goes back to what you said before about exhaustion and, finding a voice and finding each other in these times. And I think, when I'm afraid and when I'm angry and all of these perfectly justified emotional responses to our current situation, I always go back to these texts, these people, these elders and ancestors, these writers, these people whose voices soar across time and space. And if we listen to them, there may be a roadmap for us. Certainly they can provide a muse, an inspiration to do things differently and to act more bravely. But they also, I think they can give us, if we listen to them, a roadmap for how to move through this and past this into something different, something better. So that's kind of where I am at this kind of moment.
And that is a beautiful way to start wrapping up. Obviously, Audre Lorde, always a source of inspiration and guidance. And I agree with you when we look at history. I mean, we have this quote going across the bottom from Olufemi Taiwo. Our ancestors did more with less against worse. Lock in.
Yeah, that's right. Lock in.
And I think part of connecting with each other and part of, using our voices is that it reaffirms our principles. And if our principles are our principles, if our beliefs are our beliefs, then we stand up for those and we fight for those no matter what's happening. And we all knew, by the way, we knew you know, one of the lessons from the Obama presidency is that we can't be complacent even when we have the presidency, right? Like, and my work has always been on a community level anyway. But I think I knew if Kamala Harris got elected, like there was going to be just as much work, not just as much, you know, there was going to be less cruelty and suffering, hopefully, and, you know, hopefully some rule of law, and we'll see where all of that goes. But many people have faced dire conditions for hundreds of years in this country and continue to stand up. And I am so grateful that we have connected to, you know, reaffirm our principles and our beliefs. And I know this space has already been healing for me. And I hope for the people who've watched that it has held some kind of truth or support for you in the anticipation of what's coming. And we're not on a schedule yet, but we'll decide something and we'll be back speaking up more.
Yeah, and this is a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to, and we invite you to, and invite other people to join us if they are so inclined. We will also be turning this into a podcast at some point. We're making this up as we go along, but we're going to continue to go along. Not to get along, but to figure out a way forward through this and past this to something better. And so maybe even though we are out here at the end of America, at the tip of the Cape, like maybe the end of America period or exclamation mark, maybe one way to maintain a hope that we might need is to say end of America question mark. And that's for all of us to answer.
That's well put. Very well put. And we'll leave it with that question mark. Many questions, much more to talk about in the future, much more to come. So happy to be in this space with you, Tim. Thank you.
Much love. Much love.